Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. It is January 20th, 2021. Tonight's topic is the last in the chapters from my new book, The Audacity to Be You. And I think I've titled this slide actually wrong. The full title, the title of tonight's talk is The Keys to Enlightenment. But in the Keys to Enlightenment, in this chapter, I also start off with the 12 myths. Myths that I tried to think about, what are the common myths in our culture that I hear either just kind of perpetuated by the dominant culture, but even from some therapy and self-help sources, because I think there are so many. So much of what I talk about and teach is unlearning. I've been talking, I mentioned it last night, and I've been talking about it in our staff training lately with our staff, is this idea about what it means to be a human being, what it means to be fallible, what it means to be whole, as opposed to what it means to be good or right or some part self, some part object. And that, part of the idea around mental health and emotional maturity and evolution and enlightenment is being who you are, being your authentic self. And for those of us who believe that that's a way to describe those ideas, we really do believe that who we are is innately good, that without trauma or being misdirected or ideas perpetuated through generation after generation until they land with us, that essentially every human being is innately good. That they're drawn toward love and connection and toward compassion. And it's because, we learn fear and we learn shame and we learn guilt, which is also part of human nature. But when those aspects of human nature take over or are running the show, it becomes problematic. Even the most maladaptive behaviors in individuals, if you peel back the layers enough and look at it through the lens of psychology, you understand that those maladaptive or unhealthy or destructive behaviors are an attempt to meet a real intrinsic need. I used to say to the students all the time in our program, I would say, if smoking crack worked, I would teach you how to do it. And while it does work for a short period of time, obviously it doesn't work over in the long race, in the long run. Similarly, I'd say if being unkind or cruel worked for you to find meaning and belonging and joy and peace and serenity in your life, I would teach you how to be unkind. In a way, just appealing to the practicality of our clients and of our students. So tonight, I'm going to talk about some things that I think are in our culture, either in our mainstream culture, the dominant culture, or that come through the voices and the thresholds of mental health and self-help. I'm going to talk about those things that I think we need to unlearn, challenge, reconsider, be critical of, and then I'll end with the 3 keys to enlightenment. This one is predominantly, it's a part of our culture. The first myth is guilt is your conscience. It tells you when you are doing something wrong. I'll start off with just saying that's just not true. And to illustrate, all I have to do is bring up a thought experiment for all of you. Everybody listening to this can think of something immediately without even putting in much effort that would be the right thing for them to do, the healthy thing for them to do, but that would cause them guilt. I was explaining to the staff during our training today that unless you're doing battle with guilt, I don't think you're really evolving and taking good care of yourself, practicing healthy self-care, because guilt is the last sentinel that stands in the way of us taking care of ourselves in a healthy and appropriate way. Parents feel guilty for setting boundaries. I've used the example many times when I ask parents, when they say to me, I knew the right thing to do and I didn't do it. And I said, why didn't you do it? The most common answer is, I felt bad. I felt guilty. So guilt is an unreliable source of morality. Guilt in our culture is essentially um, the fear of hurting somebody else, the fear of impacting somebody else in a painful way. But again, you can think of lots of healthy things you can do in any kind of relationship that would bring up guilt for you. So you've got to find something deeper. You've got to find something more meaningful. You got to find something, I think, that's based more in love and in courage and authenticity and those kinds of attributes. So, and I hear, the example I give in the first book, and I even talk about this very clearly. A lot of self-help authors, even Brene Brown, parrots a very common idea in psychology that shame is feeling bad for who you are and guilt is feeling bad for what you do. And she uses an example in one of her two famous TED Talks. She uses an example of saying, she actually says shame is associated with mental illness and addiction, and guilt is associated with mental health. That's just not true. And guilt gets in the way of morality and doing good and doing the right thing. I think I've shared this before. It's been several months, but I share the illustration where I was in after my mother heard me give a talk a couple of years ago. She came into the mingling reception afterwards, talking to me and my brother, and she said, "I'm beginning to feel guilty for some of the ways that I raised you." And I said, "I think it could be helpful for you to understand some of the ways that you impacted us in not such a positive way. I think it would be a gift for you. It would be a gift to us." And I said, "But feeling guilty is it's not necessarily as far as I'm concerned. I don't need you to feel guilty about it. In fact, I think feeling guilty is probably going to get in the way of you being really, really honest with yourself." And when Brene Brown asked the audience in this talk if any of you did something wrong and you felt guilty about it, how many of you would apologize? And the camera scans to the audience, and every hand raises high in the air. And I'm thinking, that's just not true. And we know that. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that guilt just as often causes us to retreat from accountability, causes us to live in denial, causes us to run away from apologizing and making amends. Guilt is really kind of tied to shame, and probably is better understood instead of qualitatively different than shame. It's probably just a matter of degrees. I used to say guilt is the smoke and shame is the fire. But I said to our staff, when we switched our program in 2015 and renamed ourselves Evoke, I said at one of our first staff trainings, first therapist training, I said, I'm just going to stop debating this idea of guilt. And if you teach the idea to your parents, to your students, that guilt is your conscience and guilt is how you know when you're doing something wrong, you're going to be teaching in direct opposition to what's the truth in what I teach. And it's not even reasonably arguable. Yes, sometimes guilt lines up with morality, but just as often it either doesn't line up or actually becomes a hindrance. So it is not a reliable North Star. Empathy is a fantastic source. I talk about when I talk about this as a main subject, one of the things I explain is that the way you teach morality to children is you teach them how to feel. And when human beings learn how to feel, they recognize and respond to feelings in others in a compassionate way. But to evolve, to grow, to set, establish, to practice boundaries in your life, to practice self-care in your life, you're going to have to do battle and wrestle with guilt. You're going to have to sometimes do things that cause you to feel guilt. Myth 2, it's your job to make your spouse happy and to take care of all of their needs. This is a young, beautiful, romantic idea. But again, it comes from It comes from wounding us in childhood where we were taught that it was our job to make our parents happy and proud. It comes from, starts off with, I should say, it starts off with the idea that our parents, most of us, if we're not thinking about it, principally parent our children by telling them how we feel. And what we're implying by telling people how we feel very, very often, especially if we haven't explored it, is we're saying, don't do the thing that's upsetting me or scaring me or frustrating me, so I won't feel scared or frustrated or upset anymore. Or keep doing the thing that's making me happy or proud. The keep doing that thing that's making me feel good. It's your job to take care of yourself. I talk about earlier in the book about a wonderful short little video from Will Smith that was recorded years ago, long before Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith have come out with more details on their separation and their story. But Will said he and his wife came together at some point and they said to each other, he said to her, I want you to go and get happy. I want to see if it's even possible for you to be happy. And they decided that they would go and find happiness and then come to the marriage happy. Instead of, as he says, coming with their empty cups begging for the other person to fill it. It's your job ultimately to make you happy. And if you believe it's your job to make your spouse happy, you're going to get off centered. You're inclined to lose yourself. You're really participating in the codependent. I mean, somebody asked me today, can you define codependency for me? And that's itself a 3-hour talk. And we have many broadcasts on this subject. But I explained, I said, the thing that I would start with in codependency is that I make other people responsible for my serenity. And if that's true, then I try to control or manipulate or please or intimidate them to behave in ways that make me happy. I think it's a fundamental, again, misunderstanding about what it means to be a human. I talk about this in one of the chapters in the book. I say, the first half of my marriage, what we call marriage 1.0, my wife and I, my wife's name on my cell phone was my everything. I thought that was the ideal. A lot of these things are posited in our culture as ideals. I thought that was our ideal. And after doing a lot of work and working through a crisis, a difficult time and a separation and reuniting, my wife's name in my phone is my favorite other, which is true. Of all the others in the world, she's my favorite. I even joke with her when we're not getting along. I say, you're still my favorite other. It just lets you know about how I feel about everybody else, right? People are difficult. So there's a lot of problems that arise out of this idea that it's your job to make your spouse happy, and it's their job to make you happy. Myth number 3, children should make parents proud, or children are responsible for their parents' feelings and serenity. Kind of already spoken to this. I was saying to somebody today, I try not to think about what I think my children's lives should be like. It's not really my job or my business to mold them into what I think. It's my job to support them in where they need to go, built on a foundation of me being a self and having boundaries, right? That comes first. That's implied. But built on that foundation of self, I then make decisions and do things to see if I can support them to get where they need to go. And I don't know if they should have children. I have older children now. I don't know if they should have children. I don't know what their career should be. I don't even imagine that I have advice for them. I can share stories about what I've learned, lessons that I've learned, how I've dealt with similar challenges or situations or choices, but I don't know if it applies to them. It's not my, it's a fundamental idea about what it means to, I almost named this book, What It Means to Be Human and Love Another. Or at least that's a subtitle that I toyed with. Because the first point of this book is what it means to be a person or a human, but then what it means to love somebody else. And I was talking about this in staff in-service today. We were talking about how people come to therapy for the wrong reasons, but that's okay. And one of my staff who's very experienced in Al-Anon, she says, what we say to the newcomer in our Al-Anon meeting is, I'm glad you're here. And I would say to those of you that are new on the broadcast tonight or new on the podcast, if you're listening to the recorded version, is I'm glad you're here. Because we don't know what we don't know. And we don't know even how to get it. And we go to therapy most likely for problem solving, maybe to learn some new skills and tools, maybe to get some advice from somebody we imagine who has good advice to offer. But therapy is about becoming who you are. And then from that place, you learn what it's like to love another person. And so what Brad and you and my mother and my father, what we were taught about love, for example, isn't necessarily true. My mother tells me that she's proud of me, and I don't mean this in an unkind way, but I don't care. I was never doing it for her. That was never my point. My daughter and I sometimes have some conflict because I think she likes this idea of me being proud of her. And I try to meet her in that place. But if I'm proud of you, I can be disappointed. And that just means you're carrying around my ego, my ideas. Banksy, the enigmatic artist. If you don't know who Banksy is, look him up. He's a fascinating individual. And I don't even think we know what he looks like. I mean, that's one of the pieces. He sold that drawing or painting at Christie's that sold for millions of dollars 2 or 3 years ago, you might remember. And immediately when it was sold, when they put down the gavel and it was sold, Banksy remotely pressed a button and the frame was actually a shredder, and the picture shredded immediately, which probably made it worth more and became a famous piece of performance art at the same time it was a famous visual art. But I digress. Banksy said, and I quote in this book, he said, parents will do almost anything for their children except for allow them to be who they are. If everything goes well, your children are going to be bigger than you. Your children are going to go farther on the horizon than you do. And that your great gift to them is not the lectures or the wisdom that you have to offer. Your great gift to them is to be with them in ways that you weren't taught, to heal the trauma that you have, to unwind it a little bit so you know what it means to support them on their journey, while still, of course, remaining boundaried. Myth number 4, parents, friends, or partners should explain the reasons for their boundaries. Well, I don't know that I need to speak about this too much, but most explanations about boundaries are an attempt to get the other person to agree, to find consensus, or hopefully, if I explain things well enough, you'll just change your behavior so I don't have to set boundaries. Right? If I can convince you of an idea, of a behavior, of an approach to something, I won't have to set a boundary. Or if I set a boundary and I explain myself well enough, you won't be mad, you'll be grateful for it. And that I don't have to confront the fear that is present that's keeping me from being me. I don't have to confront the wounds that my parents and my siblings and my teachers and my peers gave to me that suggested that if you're mad or somebody's upset with me, that I've done something wrong. I remember many years ago, a mother, after receiving her son's letter, after receiving the first letter from her, he wrote back to her and she said, I guess I must have written a horrible letter. And I said, what makes you think so? And she said, well, he's really upset. And I said, his being upset isn't necessarily an indication that you were being inappropriate. It's okay to ask the question. It's okay to be curious, but it's not necessarily about you. In fact, if you make it about you, you're going to handicap yourself. You're gonna limit yourself. We want to see him. Tell me more. I'm glad you're talking about it. I want to understand what that was like. Let me see if I can, based on my own values, my own boundaries, shift the way that I respond to you, the way that I talk to you, if I can. Explaining boundaries is often just an excuse. Harriet Lerner makes very clear in her book, my favorite book on boundaries, The Dance of Anger by Harriet Lerner. She makes very clear that we do so many things. We explain, we cajole, we beg, we plead, we argue, we debate, we intimidate, we guilt, we shame. We do everything except for set a boundary. A boundary is a boundary is a boundary. And when we try to dress it up, to rough out the edges and soften it, we're really, again, trying to control the other person's feeling so that we feel good about ourselves because we haven't done the work. And that's true of all of us. Myth 5, I know what is best for others. I remember the moment when, in a culminating moment in therapy, my therapist said, we don't know what's best for others. And it's true. And by the way, very, very, very clearly, that doesn't limit your ability to set boundaries. You don't set boundaries because you know what's best for others. You set boundaries because it's your prerogative to set boundaries. Because your boundaries are an extension of your selfhood, your humanity, your humanness, your personhood. See, here's the thing about knowing what's best for others. Most of the lessons I have that I hold dear came from my mistakes. I wouldn't wish them on anyone else. I don't want other people to go through them, but they come from my mistakes. And so sometimes, well, I should say all the time, or at least most often, the route to maturity and evolution and enlightenment is circuitous. It's circular. It's crooked. It's not a straight line. So again, we stay boundaried. We support people when we can and feel okay about it with where they need to go, but we don't know what's best for others. We don't give advice. We don't tell people the way that it is. Just the other day, we'd gone through a drive-through, and my 13-year-old is sitting next to me, and I start handing her things, and she's on her phone and doing something, and I got snappy with her, and I said, Livy, when you're the passenger in the car going through a drive-through, drop everything. The right thing to do is to help the driver because they're trying to do two things, and one of them includes not killing you. So you kind of know where I got the ideas about shaming and being right. So I was doing my thing to her. And she said, do you have a need? Are you requesting something? And I said, yes. I would like some help with the order when it comes in. I'd like you to put the drinks and the drink holder and the food where it goes. She said, okay, I can respond to your request. She's 13. She said, I'll respond to the request, but don't tell me the way it is, she said. So I have created my teacher. Myth number 6, we shouldn't need someone else to validate us. Self-esteem is an inside job. I just want to save all these. It's just not true. And sometimes I hear parents try to tell their kids this. It's really important to find validation. It's a human need. It's part of our survival. It's part of what makes humans human. The thing is we need to find people that can validate all of us, not just part of us. Not just the good, the beautiful, the smart, the talented, the successful part of us, but all of us. Validation in this context is about attachment and seeing and holding space and hearing and not being judged, even when we make mistakes. That experience builds resiliency, builds selfness, selfhood, builds a self. And then the person's able to go out in the world carrying around a copy of themselves that tells them they're okay. There are things you can do, meditation, lots of things you can do to relax your nervous system, but human beings need they need to be able to look into the eyes of another and find themselves okay. Myth number 7, intimacy is warm and fuzzy. Sometimes, probably less than half of the time. It's terrifying, it's scary, it's painful. It confronts our deepest fears. It's risky. It's honest. It's requires capacity. But if somebody in your life, think of your spouse, your good friend, somebody that you care about and value. If somebody isn't talking to you, I would encourage you to get very curious as to whether you are not for them a safe person to talk to. If somebody's not sharing themselves, there's a chance, a very common idea in that person's head that it won't work if I tell you what I think and what I feel. You'll tell me in sometimes the nicest of ways that I'm wrong. Intimacy requires essentially 2 operations. Truth telling, showing up, and bearing who you are to somebody else. And then the other part that I always talk about that doesn't get any press, which is holding space for that truth. And I won't retell a story that I've told many times, but I'll just tell you the conclusion. I had somebody ask me about holding space for somebody that they cared about, if they should or shouldn't. And I said, well, you don't have to, but you can if you want to. And the person said, well, they're being childish and immature. If they were being reasonable, I would hold space for them. And I said, if they were being reasonable, it wouldn't be holding space. It would be effortless. Holding space for somebody, listening to somebody, seeing somebody means that we are in essence willing to carry their wounds a little bit, but not giving them advice or responding. It takes capacity. So ask yourself, if you're looking for greater intimacy and you're the one looking for more from the other, have conversations that ask questions like, what have I done to hurt you? Or what do I do that makes you feel unsafe? I've used this image. It's really a kind of a visual and an auditory image. But if I come to you and tell you something and your response is to gasp with something like, oh, I know you're not safe. I know you need me to take care of you. And if I'm going to take a risk, I need to be held. So intimacy is complicated and difficult and requires capacity and is scary. And the warm and fuzzy stuff is what comes after. The warm and fuzzy stuff is when we are shown grace. When we show up and we tell the truth and it doesn't bite us. And the other person has enough capacity to hear it. Myth 8, intimacy is a measure of your ability to share vulnerable, authentic truth. This is the little bit of my soapbox, this one. And I just referred to it. That's half of the equation. That's my point with this myth. It's only partially a measure of your ability to share your vulnerable, authentic truth. It's also in large part your ability or your capacity to hold space for others, to keep calm, to self-regulate, to co-regulate with the other person. Myth 9, tools and boundaries are for changing other people. I think perhaps one of the most insidious ideas that is woven in treatment and mental health and therapy and codependent talk that's uninformed is the idea that that the reason your children are screwed up is because you didn't set boundaries. And that if you set boundaries, correct boundaries, right boundaries, good boundaries, your children will heal and get better. The only thing that setting healthy boundaries does is solve your problem. The very idea that your boundaries will fix or change another person is the problem. Like I said last night, if you set better boundaries, you're not contributing to the problem. You're you're expressing yourself in such a way as to contribute to the health and well-being of those around you, those that you care about. People might not be pleased. When you set better boundaries, you're going to be called all the things you don't want to be called: selfish, self-centered, rigid. You're going to be called name. People don't like boundaries. Boundaries are honest. Boundaries are saying no. Boundaries are for changing you. Boundaries are for self-care. Boundaries are merely the expression of, or in science, we would say in social sciences, we would say they're the operationalization of, the expression of a self. Here's what I'm okay with. Here's what I'm not okay with. And the problem with some self-help authors is they just tell you how to set boundaries. That's the easy part. The hard part is confronting the ghosts and the demons that prevent you from setting boundaries, that tell you that you're bad, that you're letting people down, that you're a disappointment, a bad mother, a bad father or friend or child when you set boundaries. Myth number 10, it's my duty to give advice to those I love, including children, partners, and close friends. I can't think of anything more false than that. I'm always amused, I guess would be the word, when I'm talking to a client and they share with me that family and loved ones are giving them advice. And I'll often say, it's funny, isn't it? That I've made a career out of being a therapist and I don't give you advice. And this person is an electrician or an oncologist or, a history teacher. And they think they know what you should and shouldn't do. Well, I won't even go into should and shouldn't, because we've talked about that in the last chapter with the 8 tools. It's not how it works. I remember I said, the father told me on the first phone call that I had with him after his son had entered our program, he said, I just want to get back to the point where my son will listen to my advice. And I said, I don't think that's the golden part of this process. I get it. It makes sense. I originally thought the same thing as a parent and a therapist. But the goal is really for you to be able to listen, at least the part you have control over, for you to listen to your child. When I have individuals begin the first conversation with their inner child, it's just a intellectual kind of thought experiment about imagining talking to your 8-year-old, your 5-year-old, your 12-year-old self. Perhaps the most common inclination that people have is to give their 8-year-old, 10-year-old self advice, to tell them it's going to be okay. And what I say is, what if you asked them how they're feeling and listened? What if you said, tell me about your fear, tell me about your hurt, tell me about your sadness, your grief, your insecurity? That's the magic in mental health treatment. That's the difference between a therapist and somebody pretending to be a therapist who's really just dispensing college, graduate school education and advice to other people. My therapist taught me many years ago that one of the cues on whether or not somebody is a narcissist is narcissists don't listen. The real gold is listening, understanding, showing compassion. And that's how people heal, is when those things happen for them. Myth 11. The entitlement and narcissism of kids today stems from permissive parenting. I have a few problems with this myth. Again, I'll read it again. The entitlement and narcissism of kids today stems from permissive parenting. I can't stand phrases like helicopter parenting or snowplow parenting. I can't stand the criticism that is heaped on parents about how permissive they are and how they're raising an entitled generation. Because the reason I can't stand it is because I've come to know and love those parents. And I know that they're operating, when they do those kinds of things, they're operating from a place of woundedness, of trauma. And I don't want to label somebody with a clever name to subtly shame them for their wounds. The parent that is permissive lacks a self. The narcissistic child that raises into adulthood, the narcissistic wound is not being seen. Entitlement is an overcompensation for feeling unsafe and powerless. See, can you hear what psychology does for so many popular ideas? It brings compassion to the subject. Narcissism isn't caused by overindulging children. Narcissism comes from not seeing the child. It comes from valuing the wrong thing in the child. It comes from objectifying the child and turning them into behaviors and talents or failures. Not from, the opposite would be to see and connect to their humanity, to sit with them in their pain and their fear and their loneliness, and reflect back a sense of okayness because you've done your work. So all of these are just clever ways that pop culture tries to shame and control people. Myth number 12. I would do anything for my kids or the people I love. I wrote this one time to a reporter who asked some questions about what are things you should never say to your children. And she asked for 2, and I gave her 20. And this was the first one. And then sometime many months later, I was scrolling through social media and I saw an article in Redbook magazine. I didn't know where the reporter was from, but I saw an article in Redbook magazine that said 20 things or 50 things you shouldn't say to your children. And I'm like, I'm curious what people think, because it'd been months since I responded to the reporter. And the first one was this one: I would do anything for you. And it said Dr. Brad Reedy at the bottom. So happy it made it to the top of the list. And I think I had 2 or 3 more in the list. But number one, it's not true. And number one, it's not even something to strive for. It's a lie. And it's not a value that deserves the honor that it's given. You matter. Your children need for you to matter in your life. And if this is what they hear, if you try to tell them that this is how it is, guess what? When they're mad at you or upset with you or hurt by you, something must be wrong with them. You know, I've told the story where my daughter was doing her own intensive work and had just done a piece of work around me, her father, the wounds that I'd created. And one of the staff who happened to know me met her during the break and said, "Are you Brad Reedy's daughter?" And she said, "Yes." And he said, "I'm friends with your dad. He's a great person." And my daughter felt humiliated. Because if dad is a great, and it was said in front of all of her peers, all the people that were participating in her group, Because if dad is a great person and I'm hurt by him and I just describe ways that he hurt me and dented me and wounded me, then I must be a bad daughter. It's not true. You don't do this. It wouldn't help if you did. It wouldn't be a good model of selfhood if you did. Earlier in the book, I talk about that podcast. It's July 1st, 2016. The name of the podcast is Invisibilia, and the episode name is The Problem with the Solution. Long story short, among other things, the brain of a child is activated in fight or flight when a parent says something like this: I would do anything for you. I would sacrifice everything for you. I would walk across cut glass for you. The child's brain, the part of the brain that perceives threats, is activated when parents talk. It's overwhelming, it's consuming, it's threatening to the child's self. You're not a saint. And pretending or trying to be one robs your child of their experience of your humanity. So ending on a more positive note, these are the things not to believe. These are I just a couple of years ago, I just thought about these themes that I keep coming up with, and I call them the 3 keys to enlightenment. Adapted from something that Joseph Campbell wrote, I wrote this: enlightenment is more about unlearning and undoing. We must be willing, like the serpent, to shed the skin of our understanding and grow. Key 1, learn to be okay with being wrong and get good at losing. It's how we do boundaries. It's how we get out of being right. It's how we get out of the war within ourselves and the war with others. It just means I don't need to convince you that I'm right. I don't have to be right. I said to a client recently when they were front loading a story for me, I didn't interrupt them, but at some point I said, you don't have to justify to me your boundary and what you're doing and what you believe and what you think. It's okay. It's none of my business if this is the way that you live your life. It's okay. But I can tell from your story that it wasn't okay to be you. I hear your kids, before telling us something honest and real for them, saying things like, I know I shouldn't feel this way. I know I shouldn't say this. I know I should be grateful. I know I should be accountable. I know it's my fault. Do you know how many people in the recent awakening to social justice, do you know how many white people have said to me in therapy, I know I shouldn't complain, but I'm feeling sadness or grief or hurt. It's okay to be you. You don't have to be right. And in the moments that I live this, in the moments I arrive here, I realize I don't have to convince you. I don't have to debate. I just don't like mushrooms. Or I just don't want to go out tonight. Or I don't want Italian food. Or I don't want smoking in my house. I say to some clients, this is an illustration. I say, when you accept that you're the devil, that you're a horrible, rotten self, the actual subtitle of the book that I did use, when you become the devil of the horrible, rotten self, you're free. And you're free to love. You're free to love yourself, and you're free to love other people. But if you haven't accepted your horrible, rotten self, you're going to spend your time trying to be good, and your interactions with other people are going to be in the service of reflecting back that you're good. But when you take the energy and the power out of it by saying, I'm okay being wrong, but here's my position, you're free. And most importantly, you're free to love. In fact, what I go on to explain is, I don't think you can love truly, deeply, profoundly, unless you're operating from this place of selfhood instead of goodness. I said to somebody today, I may have said it last night. I don't know, I've given a few talks in the last couple of days. may have said it earlier on this broadcast, but as a parent, it's it's the gift of being a parent is that it's the one thing in life that you will fail at more than any other thing that matters to you. And that's why it is so valuable in becoming a person. I know some people can't have children, some people choose not to have them. That's absolutely fine. But the greatest gift of being a parent in our own, as it relates to our own evolution, our own enlightenment, our own maturing, is that we will fail at it more than anything else that's important to us. I fail at it every day, all the time. Sometimes people will say in therapy, like, I'm worse off now than when I started therapy. And what I say is, you're not actually worse off now. You just thought you were doing better than you were back then. When you wake up to what is real, you realize your parents were kind of a mess and you're kind of a mess. And when you wake up to that, you model for your children that it's okay to say, I'm sorry. It's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to look at your faults and your flaws. Don't you want that for your children? You can hear in that description the basis of resiliency, can't you? Key 2, come to know your darkness and remain on speaking terms with your mental illness. Mental illness is a continuum, not a pile of mental health and mental illness. It's a continuum, and we're all on it somewhere. And this really came from a client one time after doing a family intensive. One of the parents said to me, I came here thinking it was going to be about supporting and being willing to dive into my work, but really helping my children kind of open up and grow. And now I realize I'm my problem. I have wounds from childhood. I have issues, and that is my project. And the hope I have now compared to when I got here is I can do something about that. Nobody wants to be your project. And perhaps one of the most courageous things you can do is make yourself your own project. Take that off of your child's shoulders. Hold boundaries. Be boundaried. Work on self. But don't make it your child's job to fix you and heal you. Don't make it your job to fix them. Make your job to fix you. And by the way, when you become the project, you become a much, much, much more effective parent. When your child is the project, they're carrying on their shoulders the burdens of your anxiety and your esteem and your ego. And key 3, learn how to die again and again. Let go of old contexts, beliefs, and relationships. My older children, have on occasion asked me for advice about looking for a life partner, a spouse. And, I've said, look, I'm not sure I'm the person to go to for this advice, but I'll tell you what I've learned. If everything goes well, you're not going to be the same person you are today at 25 that you are at 45 or 65. Wouldn't it be a travesty if you didn't fundamentally grow and learn in new ways in 20 or 40 years of your life? So I said, so for me, what I've come to value so much in my wife is somebody who's willing to grow and evolve and let go of old ideas. I love when, if this goes well for you all, I love when parents say to me, and one parent said it very, very clearly many years ago during an intensive. He said to me, at one point, you challenged a very core belief of mine. And I realized it wasn't true anymore. And it terrified me because then I realized everything was up for granted. In mythology, in storytelling, often physical death is a symbol for spiritual death. And spiritual death has to occur for spiritual birth to happen, for new birth to happen. Joseph Campbell says, we must let go of the life we had planned in order to find the life that is waiting for us. Joseph Campbell's borrowing from Nietzsche when he talks about the snake that does not shed its skin will die. There's one I remember learning many years ago that one of the characteristics of toxic alcoholic families, although I just say toxic families because alcohol doesn't have to be present for this characteristic to be present in a family system. But what I learned was one of the characteristics that's often common in these families is toxic loyalty. I've held on to people and places and things that served me years ago. In fact, very, very supportively and lovingly served me at where I was at, but don't fit with me anymore. I'm lucky that I have a wife who's willing to peel back the old skin and find the new, who's willing to not know, who's willing to unlearn and to relearn or to learn new things. I am not the same father I was when my firstborn son was born 28 years ago. Thank heavens. And I won't be the same person. If all goes well, I won't be the same person. These broadcasts, my next book won't be the same as the first book. I remember when I was finishing The Journey of the Rogue Parent, I was saying to my therapist, it took me a long time to finish it and write it. And I kept saying, I keep rewriting it. And she says, you're going to have to stop. She's written 20 books. She said, I'm sorry to tell you, but you're going to have to stop someday. Put an end to it. Let your publisher have it. And then write the next book. This is hard for us. It's kind of a constant grieving process in our lives as we let go. There's nostalgia in our old relationships, our old friendships, our old ideas, our old beliefs. But I think that's what what the seasons are trying to tell us. I think that's what I always say. We always have a dog. It's not true always, but we sometimes have some space in between it. When two of our dogs passed, we didn't have a dog for a couple of years, but we most often have a dog. And I love dogs, love them. And one of the things that I learned, we just got Ruby, our now 3-year-old Rhodesian Ridgeback. And I know I'm signing up for, if everything goes well, I'm signing up for being there when she passes someday. And I love her. The minute you get a dog, if you're not really old, the ideal is that you'll outlive it. We must learn to die, metaphorically, in order to grow. All right. Looks like we're really up against the time, so I'll save questions until next time, Malia. So I'll take your questions, your live questions. Any questions you have, you can submit them now. Malia will collect them, and then we'll do them in the question and answer that I'll do next Tuesday. So let me run through the upcoming events really quick. Malia, maybe if there's one question that is asking some clarification, I'm happy to look at this. This book, The Audacity to Be You, is available on Audible and on Amazon, as is The Journey of the Rogue Parent. I narrated the new book myself. By the way, because this was received so well by you all, I'm going to start over with The Journey of the Rogue Parent and go through that book chapter by chapter the same way we just did with The Audacity to Be You. So I'm looking forward to that, mostly because it doesn't cause me to have to come up with new titles, but it's a good methodical way to take a deep dive into it and to kind of have a book club. So both of these books are available. Intensives, if you want to do deep work, if what I'm doing speaks to you and you want to dive into this, I strongly encourage you to attend either our in-person intensive or our online intensives. You can email intensives@evoketherapy.com. They're attachment-based, experiential. I believe in them. I believe it's one of the greatest things you can do for yourself, but also for your child, for your family. So we have Finding You and Finding You Too. We also have family and couples intensives. Again, any questions, Email intensives@evoketherapy.com. Oh, by the way, we just updated our intensive page and changed it around and added some new video there. So if you're curious about that, you can take a look at that on our website. We have a Pursuits Adventure Trip. It's a camping, outdoor, multi-sport, hiking, canyoneering, and yoga in southern Utah for 18 years of age and older. Think sober fun, think therapy light. It's kind of adventure and just kind of a reconnection to your therapy, to your work, run by our therapeutic staff who are excellent guides. We also have custom trips for adults and for families. Contact Sarah at evoketherapy.com, SARA at evoketherapy.com for more information. We have online support groups all year long for alumni of our wilderness or current or alumni parents of our wilderness program or alumni of our intensive program. So the next date for our wilderness families, on both current and alumni, is January 21st. That's tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. If you are an alumni of our intensive program, the next one is February 9th at 6 p.m. You can also go to our website. All the information is there, or contact Malia at evoketherapy.com for information. We ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support groups to give it a try. If you're debating in your head how or when, I will just say what I was reminded of today, that we say to people who show up for their first meeting. We're glad you're here. They'll be glad that you're there. Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. Also, RefugeRecovery.org for a Buddhist-inspired recovery program, or the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, for free or affordable resources and classes in your area. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app. Go there, subscribe. You'll be reminded when new podcasts are posted. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy podcast and subscribe, share, rate them there. You can also listen to us on SoundCloud.com. You can find Evoke Therapy using the handle @EvokeTherapy on Twitter and Instagram, or the Intensives program using the handle @EvokeTherapy Intensives on Instagram. On Facebook, you can find us by searching either Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives, and the Evoke Therapy blog has new content each week. Malaya does a wonderful job of getting us all right blogs for that and posting them once or twice a week. So thank you, Malia, for that. All right, folks, the next broadcast will be January 26th, 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. That'll be a Q&A, leftover questions from tonight or from the last time. I look forward to that. You can invite your child's siblings. You can invite your close family and friends. Any question on the program, mental health, relationship, parenting, happy to field those. You can also send any questions, suggestions, or anything you want to webinar. Is it webinars? I always remember. I think it's webinar@evoketherapy.com. Yes, webinar@evoketherapy.com. Thanks for posting the link, Malia, for the wonderful podcast that I was sharing from Invisibilia NPR. Really appreciate that. Thank you all for joining me for this series. I hope you found it beneficial. I hope you find it a helpful point of contact if you're a current or alumni family. And most importantly, thank you for and on behalf of the people that you love. Thank you for being willing to do your work, to look at yourself, to wake up to what it means to be a human and love another. Take care, folks. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.